Charles R. Fraser of 2812 Woodruff in Lansing, 48912. Chuck's phone number is area code 517-482-4819. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center on June 25th, 1990. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Chuck, if you could just start with your name and your address and your phone number, please.
My name is Charles Robert Fraser of 2812 Woodruff, Lansing, Michigan.
It's your zip.
48912.
And your phone.
482-4819.
Okay. Now, if you would just go back to when you started and tell us when that was and what you started out doing.
I came to Lansing. I was transferred to Lansing from the manufacturing staff in Detroit in March of 1953.
Okay.
And we kept our house in Detroit until July, when the kids were out of school, and moved to Lansing out on Boston Boulevard when it was still gravel in Colonial Village. And I came to Lansing as director of steel procurement to replace Clayton Denier, who was about to retire. And I had 2 interviews with Mr. Wolfram, and he decided that I would replace Mr. Denier, though Abe Goosen was not 100% sold at that time.
Abe Goosen was what?
He was director of purchases.
All right.
He had another fellow, as a matter of fact, Earl Duke, who he wanted, he had recommended for that job, and Mr. Wolfram overrode his wishes.
Okay.
And so I came to Lansing, and steel procurement in those days was pretty tough. In the post-war years, anything that would sink in a bucket of water was worth its weight in gold. And I had some access to the fellows in Detroit who were conversion steel experts where I had come from. And as far as I know, Oldsmobile never lost a car in production because of lack of steel. So that went on for, I think, about a year and a half. And I was made as assistant to Mr. Goosen.
Can you, before you get to the assistant's job, Chuck, what did the steel buyer have to do?
Well, the steel buyer was responsible. In those days, the forge plant, Oldsmobile used about 40,000 tons of steel a month in those days.
Okay. That's the whole plant?
The whole plant.
Right.
About 30,000 of it was for the main plant, and about 10,000 was for the forge plant.
Okay.
Which in those days was a big operation. We made all our own crankshafts and cams and all kinds of parts. So it represented a lot of tons and well, there's a lot of responsibility.
Sure.
And in those days, you felt the responsibility. You felt that you were making a contribution. It was not a number like people are talking about today. And we worked. You know, I didn't have dinner with my family, I don't think, other than on the weekends for a couple of years.
Oh, my goodness.
Because we were working all hours of the day and night to kind of keep the place together. Seward Van Ness, who wound up as head of materials management, was a follow-up guy for me. I was trying to think of some of the others. Ted Early and Earl Duke.
Those were all in the steel end of the business,
Dutch,
John?
Dutch Secrets, Lee Mixter, Marilyn Moore,
Right.
who wound up as secretary to the guy that ran Plant 3, I think.
Okay.
She's been retired now,
Yeah.
4 or 5 years. Let's see, then,
Those people were all in the steel end of the business, John?
oh shoot, there were, yes,
Okay.
all of them were.
How many guys and gals did it take then to buy steel? Handle the steel?
I think there were 8.
Eight of you?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think there were 8 of us.
Okay.
Harold, there's another follow-up fellow. Yeah, I think there were 8.
How did you have them organized?
Well, the bulk of them, I would get quotas or what the steel mills were going to do for us month by month, and then had to be distributed by how much went to the forge plant and how much went to the main plant, and then the follow-up was the most important part of all, being sure you got it when you needed it.
Okay.
So we had 5, I think, four fellas in follow-up, 2 girls, a girl posting and a steno, Earl Duke and myself. God, there was more than that, but
But their task, the follow-up guys and gals, were
it was to get the material in when we needed it.
to keep on the phone, kind of?
Just keep it on the phone and out on the road.
Okay.
They were on the road as much
Okay.
as they were in the plant.
They were?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
So that kind of took care of through the 53, 54 era. Then when Korea was after that, wasn't it? 55, 56?
Well, it started somewhere in there.
Yeah, but the Korean thing created another crisis. Things had started to ease up a little bit after the war, but
Right.
then the Korean thing came back, and that created some more problems. But steel did not ease up until after, must have been 1957 or 58.
Were you allocated steel? How did you get
The corporation allocated steel.
Okay.
And the theory being that there was no reason, for example, for the car divisions like Buick and Olds and Cadillac to have steel allocations that they couldn't use and then have Fisher Body shut down because they didn't have steel.
Okay.
So the theory that Mr. Curtis had established in 1948 down the corporation was that steel would be allocated centrally,
Oh,
so that Fisher Body was under all conditions protected,
right.
because without Fisher the whole corporation shuts down.
Yeah.
And so that was a management decision at the executive vice president level in Detroit. Harlow Curtis, who had come from Buick.
Okay.
And so those allocations, but there were supplemental allocations too from marginal sources like conversion steel, where we would buy semi-finished steel at one mill and ship it to another mill where they had excess capacity maybe to roll, where some mills had excess capacity to melt steel. And those were when we were in Detroit, we used to put together about 100,000 ton a month of conversion steel to supplement the corporation's normal supply.
Was that handled through the central office function too?
That was handled at on the manufacturing staff. That's how I got involved in steel
All right.
initially. So after the tight period in the mid and late 50s. I think Oldsmobile's biggest year, not biggest year, but one of the best profit years they ever had was 1955.
Right.
I know the bonuses, yeah, they were terrific. If they'd stayed like that, geez. But from there, I don't just remember when Goosen retired, but some things happened, some political things, and they brought Tom Darrington over from the Ford plant when Goosen retired.
Okay.
And so that things were, from that point on, I became the general, they called him in those days general supervisor of non-product, but that includes steel and tires and gasoline and everything that didn't go directly into the automobile.
Oh, all right.
We had construction, we had Blackwell and
All right.
on the plant.
The machinery side.
Yeah, we had, and I kept that until I retired. Today they call them assistant purchasing directors, and I don't know what the titles are, but at any rate, in those days there was the director and then two general supervisors.
Okay.
If at one time there was an assistant director, two in between. But the staff was pretty clear cut in those days, and
What did? Can you remember how big the whole purchasing gang
72 people.
was? 72.
72.
That was at the start or at the end?
Oh, that kind of, it may have been a little bigger than that initially because, Clyde Klatz, salvage, that at one time, that came under purchasing too.
Mhm.
But that, I don't know what happened. We wound up with salvage for a short time after Klotz either retired or died or something. I don't remember, but that ultimately kind of died a natural death. I don't know what became. Scrap became under material handling or something like that. It's the salvage department. I think that was ultimately part of maybe Dick Whiter's gang or Paul LaPierre or something like that. I don't know when that changed, but that was quite a while ago too.
Okay, so that size stayed sort of.
It kind of stayed there. They lost a lot of people after the war. See, during the war, you just counted heads because General Motors was paid for people, regardless of what they did. So there were large reductions, but the bulk of the time I was there, purchasing stayed around 70 people.
Okay.
And roughly half of them were in non-product and half in the product area.
Okay.
I think we had 7 buyers. Blackwell, and then Steele, and then George Hauser, Gail Wheeler.
What did these guys, do you remember what these guys bought?
Well, Lou Russo, for example, was primarily involved with the sales department.
Okay.
All the incentives and printing and all that stuff. Struble had carbides and a lot of some of the tooling material that went with the tooling, drills and taps and all that kind of stuff. Hauser handled gasoline and some of that allied things. You know, in those days, it seems to me there were about 15,000 items or something. There's some wild number. So the categories. Stuart Van Ness had steel for a while, and then think Pat Johnson and Chuck Stiles all had steel.
Okay.
I handled tires and construction. Gail Wheeler, cartons and
Okay. Packaging.
packaging and that
stuff.
kind of stuff. Blackwell dyes and machinery.
I remember Bill.
Yeah.
Was there a what I'll call a methodology to what you assigned to individuals, or how?
No, you tried to get allied things, but it's so difficult. Some of them overlapped.
Yeah.
There was no scientific method.
Yeah.
Just whatever seemed to. If one had a slightly less workload, why you tried to even out that.
Okay.
So I don't think there was any scientific.
Now, take a minute, if you can, and tell us a little bit about Abe Goosen, because he's a guy we don't know, and obviously isn't here to tell us about it.
Well, he was quite a guy. He had been a director for a number of years when I came to Lansing. He was in his early 60s at that time, and he kind of a strange guy. He was not an outgoing, exuberant type at all. He had grown up in the business and learned it by practical experience. And apparently was pretty good at what he did. Wolfram respected him, and in those days that was kind of a unique situation. And he was a single, or not single, but they had no children. His wife had worked for many years at Motor Wheel. And he was, when Wolfram made me his as two, that didn't appeal to Goosen too much either. And so he really was reluctant to delegate anything. He just kept it all to himself. And I suppose if I had gone and told Wolfram that the thing wasn't working, something might have happened. But I just presumed I was a naive kid. I just thought everybody was good and kind and understanding. And so that's how I missed getting the director's job.
If he kept all that for himself, how in the devil did he ever get it done?
He worked all hours of the day and night, and that's all he did. He had no hobbies. He did absolutely nothing besides work. He didn't golf. He didn't do anything.
Amazing.
So that he was the type that wanted to be in on everything, and felt that if somebody asked him a question, he had to have the answer right at his fingertips, rather than saying, "Well, I don't know, but I'll find out."
Yeah.
And I guess he had been at it long enough that he knew that. So he was pretty good at what he did.
Was he? Could you approach him and talk to him, or?
Yeah, but it didn't do any good.
Wasn't doing
No, he had his mind made up, and he wouldn't, really take a position. It was just, I think, the path of least resistance, kind of, as he knew he was going to be going, and didn't want to get in any kind of controversies or anything like that. Don't rock the boat. Just keep it nice and smooth, and don't antagonize Mr. Wolfram, because everybody was scared to death of Wolfram.
Really?
Oh, God. What Bill Hayden, some of those fellows went through with Wolfram was unbelievable. Just cut him to pieces in the staff meeting. I don't know how some of them weathered the storm, but I guess they did.
Did you have any dealings with Wolfram yourself? during that time?
No. You know, after you
After you hired
after you hired me and got me in the middle of this mess, why, you know, you kind of forgot you were there.
Okay.
and I guess that wasn't too unique. I guess he did that with some of the other guys too.
Did he?
Yeah. But he was a rare guy.
Well, let's see. Then you said Tom Darton followed Goosen.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, did Tom change how the place ran at all?
Yeah. Tom was more a delegator. As a matter of fact, Tom didn't know anything about the purchasing department. Absolutely nothing. He had come over from the forge plant.
Okay.
He ran the forge plant. Well, Tom, and this is just my own opinion. I don't know that I want. If this is for absolutely total outside consumption, I guess I better not.
Your pleasure.
Yeah, because Tom Downey didn't think too much.
Oh, Tom Downey.
Downey,
Oh, okay.
no. And, well, at any rate, Tom got the job, and Tom leaned on Bill Haight. Bill Haight did everything for Darton.
Was Bill the assistant or something?
Bill was the other assistant.
Okay.
And by that time, I had gone into the non-product as general supervisor of non-product, and Bill was general supervisor of product.
Two guys working for.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, the product part of the business was the one that got all the visibility, because that's the one that had all the problems, or the bulk of the problems. And then when Tom went over to reliability, and I have no idea when that was. That must have been
In the 60s sometime.
in the 60s sometime. And the reliability department is a department that never should have been even conceived if the purchasing people had been doing what they should have done. You know, it was another staff head job. It was a tremendous expense, and all they did was verify the suppliers. You know, the concept, I guess, was one of Skinner's, that a part was supposed to do what it was supposed to do. Well, you know, that's so simplistic that it sounds difficult. But if the purchasing department had been able to get out on the road and get to see their suppliers and understand the parts, but that was not part of Goosen's philosophy. He didn't want to spend the money. So all of a sudden you wind up with a reliability, which is a staff head job, whole new staff, and all they did was what the purchasing department should have done. Verified and understood and evaluated suppliers. Just that simple. So somebody sold a real bill of goods when they wound up with reliability.
Did Bill Haight took over when Darton left?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had very little to do with them. I mean, the non-product, we always didn't seem to have any problems. You know, all the problems were in the product end of the business. So we were kind of the dragging along the rear, you know, without any visibility or anything. And I guess maybe that's the way it was intended to be.
Did it change when Bill took over? Did now the management style change at all?
No.
He was still a delegating type individual?
Not as much as Darton. Not as much as Darton. But once again, Bill had grown up in the product end of the business, and that's the part that he knew and was interested in. He couldn't care less about non-product. You know. So we just kind of went our own ways, and as long as everything was working okay, no problems.
You guys were still buying steel.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
But steel had eased up to some degree. And everything else had too.
Well, you had a mess of steel strikes, as I remember, over the years.
Yeah,
under
but
Walkinshaw.
what we used to do was, in the years of the strikes, we would start usually the strikes were around September. So we'd start building inventory about 6 months, and we build 90 days inventory in our plant, and then after either the strike or the strike threat was over, would deplete it over the next 90 days.
Oh, so it was kind of a peak.
So, yeah, and that's what created the severe peaks and valleys, not only of inventory, but of money.
Yeah, true.
It cost a pile of dough to stockpile the 90-day supply of steel for General Motors. Awful lot of money.
Yeah.
But that was just one of the insurance things that they did in those days. Now, later, they didn't have to do that anymore, but that was one of the things that created the foreign buying. Was the lack of stability in the domestic industry.
Oh,
Sure.
okay.
So rather than stockpile 90 days of steel, you place the orders with the foreigners who didn't have strikes. And that's why the steel industry in this country today is about maybe 2/3 of what it was in those days. Many of the mills aren't even around anymore that were operating in those days. The steel industry got hurt just terribly when the domestic people started buying, particularly Japanese, but French, German, all the foreign mills were coming in here in the late 60s and early 70s. So I guess that was maybe part of the forerunner of just on time and that type concept.
Share with me, in the early days, what did we carry in the plant? How long, how much?
Oh,
steel?
we used to carry roughly 30 days.
30 days.
Roughly
Okay.
30 days.
Now, did that change any over that continuum of time as you were there?
No, not to any great extent.
Okay.
You kind of placed it as you got it. In some instances, maybe we would place it 6 weeks. If requisitions came through in time and material control did the things that we had hoped they would do, the more time you had, those orders were not commitments until they went into process. But if you could get in the mill schedule, the longer you could give them, I guess it's like anything else. The more lead time you can give them, the better job they can do. But generally speaking, our orders were placed 4 to 6 weeks prior to the delivery.
Okay.
And that carried right on through for a number of years.
And you tried to keep 30 days in the plant?
Yeah, yeah. Now, when the computers came in there in the late 60s and early 70s, they tried to do it to tighten up, but in many cases you had to bypass the computers just from a very practical standpoint. I mean, the theory of some of the scheduling that they did was fine, but in practical applications just didn't work. And I don't know, I suppose it does now, when the mills are so hungry and they have, in those days the mills were operating at like, between 85 and 95%. So they didn't have the room to maneuver. And if they had problems, well, that cut down the accessibility too. So it was, I don't know what kind of computer system they have now, but the mills are much more flexible. And the mills carry inventory too. It's a question now, I guess, of who stores what. It's not a General Motors storing it, but a supplier store. and that's part of the cost. But anybody that thinks that ultimate consumer doesn't pay for it, one way or another, doesn't understand what makes business go around.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to pay for the convenience. And I know when, just before I retired, just after I retired, they went to blanket orders on non-product steel. We used to carry a big inventory of non-product steel.
That's like the shapes. And
Yeah, angles, channels, beams.
Okay.
And in some cases, 3 shifts. So we had our own maintenance people. Well, somebody decided that that was not efficient. And I know Mary Beth Pallas was involved with maintenance steel after I'd retired, and I saw her one day, and she said, well, we're just not in the steel business, we're in the automobile business. And I said, well, what happens now if a machine goes down and you need a little piece of steel? And Ryerson doesn't have any pickup trucks. They got those great big tandem jobs. She says, well, they bring it up on one of those big trucks. I said, who pays for that? She says, they do.
Right.
Well, I said, okay, but how long are they going to stay in business if they give you a piece of steel like that and put it in one of those big trucks? So you do pay for it, but you call it something else, or you're too naive to understand what happens. But that was just one of the later changes that.
When did you retire, Sean?
I retired in October of '74.
Okay.
I wanted to go in March of '74, but they screwed around and horsed around, but I did get out in October of '44.
Where was the office when you first came in 52?
Oh, in the old administration building. It used to be the auditorium.
Okay.
You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Huh? Well, purchasing had that whole room.
Which was kind of up over the garage?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, right
Okay.
above the garage. And then we had, after that, the non-product group, well, that was all product up over the garage.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Non-product was down the hall. The
Oh.
sales department was on one end of the building,
Okay.
and purchasing and what else? I forget what else was at the other end.
You were down in the far wing, in the wing?
Yes,
So
as non-product.
Okay. Was
That
it
was-
north or south? Do you remember which end as you came in?
It would have been the south end.
South.
The sales department had the north end.
Okay.
And, yeah.
So you guys were all down in that little corner down in the south end of the building, that wing that stuck out.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
No, down the hall,
Oh, you were just down
facing
the
the
alley.
front, just
All
down
right.
the aisles,
All
not
right.
in the big
Not in
end.
the big end.
No,
Okay.
no.
All right.
Uh,
And the product guys were all up on the...
The product guys were all up on the
Okay.
in the raised area above the garage.
And where did the director...
He was in there
he
too.
was up there.
He was up in the corner.
And so that's where Goosen was sitting?
Yep, yep,
Okay.
yeah.
What about, now, this is kind of a funny question, Chuck, but how did you handle relations with suppliers in those days?
Well, in those days, the supplier was kind of an equal. They were treated fairly and equitably. There was competition, but everything didn't depend necessarily on price.
Okay.
Capabilities and engineering and R&D and that type thing were taken into consideration. You know, purchasing was always accused of buying the cheapest thing, but they didn't. However, everything else being equal, that's an obvious way to go. Inequality is tough to evaluate because as an example, every engineer has his own idea of what fuse is the best fuse. You may have 10 engineers and each of them would like a different fuse. Well, that's just not practical. You know, everything else being equal. And fuses were built to some electrical engineering specs, so they all had to do about the same thing. But one guy's experience may have been a little different. So that created some problems, but Goosen was the type guy that didn't want to create any problems, so he kind of let the guys out in the plant select.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And that was one of the don't rock the boat deals.
Okay.
And
Well, that must have made some, what I call unique difficulties there.
it did. It didn't at that time. Because, as a matter of fact, the sales department, we didn't even have a guy. A person did nothing for the sales department.
Who bought all of the brochures?
The sales department were given purchase orders by Goosen.
Oh, great.
Well, when I came in there, plant engineering, for example, Rasmussen, he selected the suppliers. They wrote out the spec books. They did all kinds of things that purchasing didn't feel they should get involved in. And God, we were the ones that started bringing in other suppliers, other products. Oh yeah, and that created some real problems too. I mean, you know, you step on anybody's toes on their prerogatives. People just do not want to, once they've got them, they don't want to give them up. And we had a purchasing manual that was printed by the corporation that kind of told you the way the purchasing should operate, and yet most purchasing directors, that was put out by the corporation, where there was no argument about the things that were bought centrally. But man, the stuff that was bought at the plants, it was jealously guarded by the plants. As a matter of fact, the consolidated purchasing that went on through the 70s, the plant managers just fought it, and ultimately a lot of that was disbanded. I don't know if you remember, they had a big central purchasing area over in Flint. Bob Turner, who I had worked with down in Detroit, headed that 10 plant thing, and ultimately I guess that was disbanded because there was just too much animosity among each individual plants, the prerogatives that they had to give up, and they just never agreed to do it. So to keep the thing on an even keel, they had to ultimately disband it.
Did the relationship with suppliers from that time you started to the end, did that change much as far as?
Oh yeah, originally, I mean, when steel was in tight supply, we were out wooing the suppliers.
Okay.
But as that thing turned around, and it ultimately did, in my estimation, the suppliers were just crucified. I mean, the steel industry was a specific case of threats and coercion, and some of the younger guys coming up use the word clout. Well, you know, operating by clout is not a very good, dependable way to run a plant with 20,000 people, because clout can backfire pretty quick. I mean, a lot of people today just don't accept clout. I mean, they say, well, you know, guy told me there's no honor in going broke waiting for an order from Oldsmobile. No. And that attitude today, you know, if you don't have a good supplier base, you're not going to run.
Mm-hmm.
And you can coerce them to some degree if that's the way you want to do it, but they're not going to like it.
Yeah.
I mean, they may furnish the parts to you, but that was one of the problems with quality. You know, you may not get 100% parts. They say, well, okay, so there's a half a dozen bad ones in there. Well, you know, we're not going to inspect them 100% if only 1%'s bad,
Mm-hmm.
or 2% or something like that. Well, that's how you get bloopers.
Yep.
And I mean, if people are not happy and are not treated fairly and equitably as a supplier, they're not going to be a good supplier.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to find ways to get even, or ways to make money one way or another, because they aren't going to go broke. So when you use words like clout, and that was one of them that some of the younger guys picked up someplace along the line in the 70s, and that was one of them that what were the two guys' names? Early?
Pat Early?
Pat Early,
Mm-hmm.
and who was the guy that was head of material, or was in material control, that were doing all the work on the computers? Pat Early. He now is head of materials management, I think, out at the new motor plant.
You are thinking of Dennis...
Dennis Duffy.
Yeah.
When Duffy and Early, they were two of the guys that their attitude was just stick it in those suppliers and break it off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just figured that General Motors was so big and so good, you didn't have to worry about lead times or anything like that. But all of that, as a matter of fact, their scheduling system, when they first came in, when those kids first came up with the computers, all they had was a high point schedule. And it was up to the supplier to keep track of how much they had shipped and how much was still due against that high point. I guess it's all right. You know, but prior to that, we would give them a quantity for January
Mm-hmm.
or something. So it's just a question of where you want the responsibility. Do you want to keep it yourself, or do you want to give it to somebody else?
Yeah. Yeah.
So apparently it worked, but there were a lot of misgivings about it, and the supplier base today, I don't know, my gosh, it must be 60% of what it was in those days.
So it's contracted.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know. They've got a lot of, you know, you used to have 2 or 3 suppliers of everything to be
Yeah.
sure. Now
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that they just have single suppliers. They're trying to copy the Japanese concept.
Mhm.
Well, that's fine if you have the same philosophy as the Japanese, but we don't. We want our freewheeling attitude, and you know, the Japanese have plants right next door. Their suppliers, they're dedicated the rest of their lives to each other. Well, God, those blanket orders are fine if you get them one year, but you have no assurance of getting it the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through that with one of our other suppliers, and Jesus, so what was a 30-day inventory when you're supplying General Motors, and all of a sudden you lose that contract for the next year, well, your inventory is 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of 30 days. So a lot of people got out of that business.
Yeah.
They just said, well, who needs it?
Yeah. Did we tend to flop around and not keep the same supplier? Is that what we were doing?
No, to some degree we did. And yet, I guess, I don't know how prevalent that was. Maybe not as much as... I don't think it ever harmed or jeopardized production or anything like that, but it created an awful lot of unfairness, if you will, and I guess I don't know what's fair anymore. Rules have changed so drastically that. But General Motors was known for many, many years as one of the great people to do business with, and they don't have that reputation anymore.
What do you attribute that early relationship to?
Fairness and equitable treatment.
Okay.
And we were willing to pay for what we got, and you could always get anything you wanted if you were willing to pay for it. I mean, you could get 100% of anything if you're willing to have 100% inspection, or 100% testing, or 100% whatever.
Yeah.
But nobody would ever agree with that. If it doubled the price of a bolt, to have everyone Magnaflux or something, they say, hey, you're out of your tree. Well, how can a guy assure you of 100% quality if he doesn't check it some way? When he gets a bar from the steel mill, they don't check every single bar, or if they Magnafluxed every one of those bars, his costs double. They Magnafluxed every bolt, our costs double, and all of a sudden, the thing gets ridiculous. So where do you start and where do you stop? It's I don't know.
Chuck, you mentioned that in the later years you were working with computerized handling of steel. What were you doing in the early days?
All done by hand.
All done by hand.
All done by hand. The forge plant would send over, and downstairs would bring up a requisition of how many cars we were going to build, and how much steel it required.
So would they explode it by sizes?
Yep.
Tonnages and
Yep.
all that?
Yep. Well, we may do some of that, but the bulk of it was item by item.
They'd hand you a
How
piece of
many
paper?
feet of hoods you needed? How many feet of coils of fenders you needed for 150 cars for next month?
All right.
And it was easy to handle. You knew exactly how many feet it took for that many cars, and that's exactly what you ordered.
How did you handle what I'll call the losses or the scrappages?
Well, scrap, there was, like 4 or 5% or something. As long as it was 2 or 3 or 4%, that was an acceptable thing in those days.
Did you put that in, or did they put it in?
We would put it in. We'd order 4 or 5% more than we needed, or maybe you wouldn't even notice. If you were carrying 30-day supply and 4 or 5% was bad, you may all of a sudden find yourself in a hell of a jam because for 3 or 4 or 5 months nobody had put any surplus in, and then all of a sudden you're out. And so you have those instances, but you could cover up for an isolated case like that. That wasn't. But in those days, and it was easy to follow up that way because you knew exactly what you had placed for what delivery. When you leave this, when you put that responsibility on the supplier, unless somebody's calling him every single day, yeah, he knows what he's supposed to ship every week. But if it doesn't get shipped, where are you? So then you've got a crisis every time you turn around. You got some kind of a crisis. Well, you can probably get out of it, but they're expensive. I mean, when you're shipping special trucks and special transportation, and you got people working overtime and a lot of monkey business, ultimately somebody's going to pay for that. And if you create this type of an atmosphere at the supplier, you're going to pay for it, ultimately, or he's going out of business. I mean, he just cannot do all of these extra things without having it cost him some money. So if he has to have clerical people keep track of the schedules, all he's doing is what we used to do, and so you just transfer that cost. But somebody's paying for it. So, who's kidding who?
Did you fellas use certain mills for certain kinds of steel?
Sure. Oh, sure. We had the ones that we thought were the best quality on the tougher items. Jones and Laughlin came up in about I would say 1962 or 3, with a brand new concept for bumpers called surfer glaze.
Mhm.
And what they did was grind them themselves and put a plastic coat on them.
Okay.
Now, if you recall, the old press plants used to be the dirtiest things in the world. They had oil all over the place for lubricating and stuff. Well, when J&L came up with this product, we used to have to do our own grinding of cold rolled before we plated it. This stuff came in all ground and coated, so it went right in the press.
Okay.
And it was a wider soluble stuff coating, plastic coating. And so you form the part, run it through the cleaner, and stick it in the plating. And we used to use about 6,000 ton a month of bumper steel.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had the front and rear on every car that we built. As a matter of fact, we made some in those days for Pontiac, somebody else, maybe Buick. I'm not sure. But so that got to be a pretty attractive business. But it saved Oldsmobile all kinds of money.
How did a thing like that now come to pass? Is that something
They developed it. They developed it themselves, absolutely. Absolutely. We were using an old NAX type. It was a higher strength material. They'd used it since World War II. And had we bought it as cold rolled and still had to grind the surface to get it smooth enough for plating. And the surfer glaze, I forget what the savings was, but it was substantial. And J&L had a patent on it for a year because of the coating. And nobody ever did decide to, by the time the patents had expired, J&L was handling about all in the industry of that was available, so nobody else really got into it. A couple of the other mills ultimately got into the coated products on heavy hot rolled axle housing and stuff like that that we used for a long time. The bulk of that was through Great Lakes Steel, and they had a warehouse called American Steel that also were involved in a coating patent that they had for a year with Montgomery. Remember Montgomery Chemical? And so that was one of the newer things, and that's why today, Jesus, I'll tell you, I went through that Ogahari plant down in Howell a couple of years ago. Those guys walk around in white coats. Oh, you could eat off the floor. Most beautiful plant you ever laid your eyes on. And they just doubled the size of it. They had 960 square feet, and there's 1,000 square feet, and they just doubled it. So today, the old press plant concept that we were used to, dirty, filthy, floors all greasy, they just don't have that anymore.
Who are some of the other steel suppliers that we dealt with?
Oh, we had all the big ones. Bethlehem Steel was our largest supplier for many, many years. As a matter of fact, during the war, they built shell casings, and that was where the relationship with Bethlehem Steel started. And that was maintained for many years after the war. They were about a 20% supplier to Oldsmobile. But we had U.S. and J&L and Inland and Armco and Great Lakes and Republic, Bethlehem, U.S., all the big ones. Weirton. Well, all the top mills. Yeah, we had all the big mills. There is no Republic anymore.
Some of those people disappeared, didn't they?
Yeah, Republic's gone. J&L bought them.
Great Lakes still existing?
Great Lakes is part of National Steel, yeah, but the Japs own half of the Great Lakes now. Weirton used to be part of National Steel, and they are now owned by their employees.
Mm-hmm.
And that apparently is working okay. McLouth is now owned by the employees. That used to be Don McLouth owned that. Bethlehem is just a fraction of its former size. I don't know, maybe 30% of what it was. U.S. Steel is still the biggest relatively, but they've closed an awful lot of their facilities. It seems to me the industry used to make around 100 million ton a year, and I think now they're down to around 70 or something like that. So a lot has happened in the steel industry. They have been hurt just severely in the last 15 years. Primarily because of foreign.
Yeah.
And
Cars have gotten lighter, so there's less.
sure, there's less steel in them. You don't even have a forge plant anymore. All those are castings, which are lighter and cheaper. So,
Chuck, did we have any kind of events for suppliers as Oldsmobile?
just the shows. We used to have for the announcement shows. We used to have a day for the suppliers.
Okay. What would we
Other-
do there?
Just invite the suppliers in
all
for the
of them,
day.
everybody?
Well, yeah, everybody. They made a list. Each
Yeah.
buyer or each department put together a list, and then they refined it depending on how many they could have. But I don't ever recall having cut
Not a
anybody out.
specific, show, though.
No.
So they would come to our regular announcement show?
Yeah.
One day of that?
Yeah, one day of the 3 days or something like that would be for the suppliers. Other than that, I don't recall anything.
Can you share with me how the, once again, these may be bad words, but how the gift thing changed over that continuum of time?
Well, I think the gift thing was blown way out of proportion. As a matter of fact, we found, I don't know, I forget when it was written in policy. The gift thing right after the war, World War II. Money meant absolutely nothing to anybody. I mean, you could sell anything, and if you got a price increase, you just passed it along, and inflation and all of those bad things as a result. And money didn't mean anything. So, I guess there were, I suppose everybody has a price. And mine was always so high, I said, well, if I can retire and live the way I used to the rest of my life, I may talk to you about it. But General Motors always paid pretty well.
Yeah.
And I think we were less susceptible to that type thing than either Ford or Chrysler. Chrysler was notorious about that type stuff, and we had some pretty bad guys. I knew a few in the purchasing department that had, when they went out to lunch, they went the same place every day, and they had 3 martinis waiting for them when they got there, so they could get those down and get their lunch and get back on time. And I mean, drinking at noon was something that I never did. I just couldn't be efficient. But we had a lot of guys that did. And it was abused, there's no question about that. But the purchasing people were blamed for the bulk of it when other people were much worse than purchasing. Traffic was absolutely horrendous because all the carriers were controlled. And the only one thing they had to sell was service. The steel industry, it was kind of in that same boat because they had published prices in those days. And they pretty much stuck to those published prices. So all they had to do was service. And we used to get, for example, I mean, you didn't get a lot of material things, but J&L, for example, Russ Durr, who was vice president of sales at J&L, I had worked with in Detroit. He came from General Motors, and he went to J&L when I came to, or a year before. He left the corporation a year before I did, and went with Abe Adams, who was chairman of the board at J&L. Well, Russ they had a Gulfstream, and Russ would send the plane out and pick up Darton and myself, and maybe somebody from the jet plant, Del McRae. Rallis never went. Well, Rallis didn't play golf, and they'd pick us up Friday afternoon, and Russ belonged to Oakmont, but Chuck Beagley, who was chairman of the board of J&L, belonged to Laurel Valley, which was Arnold Palmer's summer golf course. So we'd go over Saturday morning, play a Laurel, and Sunday morning have dinner, and then Sunday morning play Oakmont, and then they'd fly us back home Sunday afternoon. So there was that, but and that, to the best of my knowledge, it's not as prevalent as it used to be. But it still goes on. I mean, you know, the business of giving away refrigerators and washers and dryers, there may have been isolated cases, but
those are the stories you hear.
Yeah, but and another thing that they used to do, all the ore boats. I was never on one, but I.
Charles R. Fraser of 2812 Woodruff in Lansing. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center on June 25th, 1990. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes.
Okay. The ore boats.
Well, the ore boats, they would take 6 or 8, 2 or 3 or 4 couples. And you get on them like at Gary and ride up to the Seward or Duluth or someplace and back, maybe 3 or 4 days. And those, I guess, were quite nice. I don't know whether they still do that anymore or not. But yes, we went to some pretty nice places. But I found that the traffic guys were the ones that, I mean, they had no compunction about the night before a Notre Dame football game. Call up one of the trucking companies and say, "Hey, I got to have 4 tickets for the game tomorrow," you know. And then it got to the point where the corporation said if you could drink it or eat it in a day, that was acceptable. Well, shoot, that, you know, it just doesn't make sense. So I think it was a matter of good judgment all the way along. But it was abused for a long time. I don't think anyone would deny that. However, I think the purchasing department were accused of it to a great degree. Product engineering. Product engineering. You know, one of the worst guys that I ever knew in that area was Drexel. Jesus, I mean, what the chemical people did for him when the polypropylene and some of that stuff first came in. Woo-hoo. So, once again, it was just something that kind of got started and nobody quite knew how to cure it. But one of the guys that I knew down in Detroit, Dick Krozik, was just canned a couple of years ago. It was in the Free Press. Damn fool. From one of the tire companies, they redid the floor in his family room or something, put carpet in it. Good God. And they can him, and all of his benefits and everything is gone. Just from some stupid thing. But General Motors has always paid better than either the other 2 companies, and there was no need for that. No need for it at all. I don't think Bill Haight had dinner at home ever. I don't think he did. Fran would call up the product buyers and say, "Hey, we don't have anything going on Thursday night."
That was kind of a hint.
That's right. So it was done, but it was, I thought that was, I was just dumbfounded. Nobody ever caught up with that.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think Fran said one day she hadn't cooked a meal in 30 years or something like that. It's been a long time. Yeah. But,
well, see, now, you moved to Building 70 sometime in there.
Building 70, we moved over there when it was first opened.
Okay. And where were you guys then in that building?
We had in that main level, just off the lobby,
Mm-hmm.
we had the whole south east corner
Okay.
of that building. And Haight was over in the big building, over in the other wing, down
Okay.
below, in the staff offices
Yeah,
over there.
okay.
He was right next door to the sales department.
All right.
He was the only one over there.
Okay.
Everybody
He
else
just
was.
across the
He was
lobby.
just across the lobby.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And today, I don't know.
Yeah.
They're scattered all over.
Yeah.
In the old personnel building, and I really don't know what.
How did people feel about that switch from the old building to the new building?
Oh, it was beautiful. Jesus, I'll tell you, the old temporary, noisy, raucous old building. Those were all temporary quarters in that old auditorium.
Yeah.
In the new administration building. I was really closely associated with that because of that was one of the things that we had handled, and so that was quite an experience. That's when Wolfram hired. When we had Lee Witter handling the aesthetics because he didn't think Rallis was enough of an expert. He's just a roll up his sleeves and work guy. And so
Right.
Wolfram wanted somebody with a little class to be liaison between he and so he had Lee Witter handling the furnishings for the administration building for all the executive wing. And so Lee, to be perfectly safe, hired Leonard Meltzy.
Oh, yeah.
And God, the money they spent on that Northware. Well, our offices were quite nice too. I mean, we all had lamps and ashtrays and the whole schmear. But it cost a pile of dough. And I tried to make it competitive, and Jesus, I thought I'd create a absolute riot. And we were able to make some of the desks in the mass areas were kind of competitive, but all the rest of that stuff Meltzy handled with an iron fist, and there was just no way to crack that without going to Wolfram, and I thought that's hardly worthwhile. So Leonard made a pile of money on that operation, but it was quite nice. I think the building came out remarkably well.
Everybody was happy with their new office.
Oh, sure. How could you be anything else? It was lovely. It was quite nice.
Did you have to deal with Wolfram at all in that sort of arena, or how?
No.
It was just.
Yeah. He got so aloof. He just all he did was bark. God, I guess it was horrendous dealing with him. Everybody used to complain about it. Right from Rallis on down. Rallis was one of the better guys over there. He's a super guy. Tom Downey was a character.
See, Tom preceded Rallis.
Rallis, yeah. And Downey, they couldn't handle much more of him. He almost knocked that building down about 5 times. He hit the garage doors.
Oh, you coming to work?
Coming in or going
my
out.
goodness.
Oh, God, he was terrible. he was the old school. Jesus, he'd just get bombed.
Oh, really? How did they handle those kinds of things in those days, Chuck?
Well,
Or didn't they?
they didn't. That was, I guess, part of when I came to Lansing, Claytoneer, oh God, the Clayt would go out at noon.
Yeah, I would think you'd have all kinds of
Just
problems.
get bombed and come back and be absolutely useless all the rest of the day. But nobody ever said anything to him. They just, I don't know, the old hard drinking, hard driving, tough old guys, I guess that was kind of the...
Was this kind of an accepted practice?
Yeah, apparently. And once again, I don't think that was too unique.
No.
That Bugs Dakin over at the Forge plant, I know he and the Detroit district manager for Republic Steel was a big old tough guy. And geez, they'd get together, and it was just a marathon. I mean, they go through bottles of
Drink
that
each other's
bourbon.
name.
Oh God, just awful. And Jesus, I enjoyed a few drinks as much as anybody, but
Yeah.
God, I could never handle the way some of those guys operated. Whew. But that was like everything else.
Yeah.
That kind of died out. That went down the...
That was an era that...
Yeah, that went down the tube too. So. But that's kind of it. I don't know, 74 rolled around in an awful hurry.
Yeah. Well, I think you did a good job there, Chuck.
Oh, we got along. Yeah. We never, as I say, in all the steel days, we never lost a car. And
But you must have burned a ton of midnight oil.
we did, no question about it. But that's the only way you could do it. I mean, it was one of those things where you just couldn't confirm everything you did. I mean, so much of it was done verbally.
Yeah.
So much of it was done over the telephone. It was just impossible. So you had to trust the people you were dealing with. I mean, today, if you have a problem, the first thing you do is look for a fall guy. I mean, in those days, geez, if you had a problem, you cured it. Everybody got together and you cured it, and everybody learned something, and you never heard another word about it. And I mean, that was one of the reasons that I left. It got such a chicken operation, and I just couldn't wait to get out of there. It was just no fun anymore. And I had always wanted to get in the sales end of the business. I wish I had done it now, 35 years ago. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot less hassle.
Yeah.
If you don't like a guy, you just don't call on him anymore. And we opened Jim Sherry, who retired from Buick. He was production manager over there. Sherry and I opened up a little manufacturer's agency in 1974.
Okay, right after you left.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And kind of what we've been doing ever since.
Oh, that's neat.
Jim's not too active anymore. Jim is 70. He was just 76.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way to go.
Well, you think we pretty well plowed it in the ground, Chuck?
I think so.
Good job.
Well, I don't know what, if you get something specific that comes up,
Yep. Well,
let me know.
Yeah.
Because, it's tough going back over
Oh, sure.
35 years. And I'm not even sure the writing a synopsis of some kind or another would help you too much either.
No, not necessarily, yeah. And just doing it this way, you can kind of plow the subjects that seem to be maybe interesting or appropriate, so.
But the politics over there was and I guess you got it any place.
Yeah.
I'm sure it had happened out in whatever areas out in the plant too. I remember one of the great guys was Russ Hansen, and I even got in a little hassle with Russ. He says, "Jesus, don't you guys have any compassion at all?" They bought some dyes from a guy, and the guy came back for more money. Yeah, and I said to Russ, "Well, Jesus, Russ, you know, the guy wasn't the low bidder to start with." And I said, "No, how can we possibly justify giving this guy any more money?" Russ said, "Jeez, you know, you don't have any compassion at all." But Russ was one of the good guys to get along with. Bob Russell was easy to get along with. Yeah, it was fun.
Okay.
All righty.